Hey, welcome back. Video number 4. We're going to implement the endpoints that we have created so far. But first, we need to address a small discrepancy that we have between the UI and the database. If you notice here, our schema is using title and year, but our UI has title and author. So we need to consolidate both things. And to do this, we are going to work with Drizzle to add a migration and add the author column. And later on, we're going to add a new input for the year on this side. So let's take a look at that. Let's first go to our packages and then the API and run Drizzle Studio to see the current status of the database. I have it open right here. So we have one table, and as we can see here, there is only ID, title, and year, right? So let's go ahead and add a column for the author. I am going to split here this horizontally so we can have both terminals running at the same time. And then from the API package, first make sure that we added the column, we save the file, and now we can generate a migration file. So the changes in the database are backed up in code. So we generate the migration with the generate command. And we can go and see this file with the random name. This is adding the column author to the table books, right? At this point, we haven't touched the database. We have just created the migration. So the next step would be to actually push the changes to the database. And we can do it with the push command within Drizzle kit. Now, if we go here and refresh, we see that the author column has been added. At the same time, up here, we can see the structure of the table and the new column is there. Now let's add the new field in the UI side. I'm gonna close Drizzle Studio for now. We don't need it anymore. Let's go to the API. Let's go to the UI package now. npm run dev. I'm just running the UI now. First, let's tackle the table. Here we need to add the year. So this is going to be hard-coded still. We are going to replace it soon. I'm just going to put some random value for now for each one of them. And then let's look at our type, the book schema. And here we are missing the year, which we want it to be a number right next to the author column. Let's add the year. Let's get a new cell for the year value here. Great. Now let's work on our forms. So from here, just gonna go ahead and copy this field and rename as needed for the year. Good. Perfect. So that's for the UI now. Let's move on to the implementation of the API, the fun part. Let's make sure that we have committed our changes to this point. And since we added a new column to the books table, we need to go and fix our post handler and account for the author field. In our get endpoint, we are returning an object that includes the array of books. So instead of doing that, let's just return the array, and that's going to make things easier later on when we fetch data with React Query. Same idea here for getting a single book. Let's just return the result that the database is going to give us without having any nesting nor any book object. Same idea here, return the updated book. Great. Let's move forward with React Query. From the React Query website, we navigate to the installation instructions, and then we find the package that we are going to add with pnpm. Now from our UI package, we can go ahead and do pnpm add TanStack React Query. From the API, we are going to run Drizzle Git Studio So you can take a look at a few entries that I've added to the database. See them here. And now let's go ahead and implement the first API call. Referring to the documentation of React Query, we can see that to use it, we need to wrap our app at the root level and use query client provider with a query client. So let's go ahead and do that in our main file. And now to fetch data, we are going to use the useQuery hook from React Query. Query key is a unique identifier, which is usually an array of strings or variables that tells React Query how to cache and track the data for your query. On the other side, the query function is a function that you provide to fetch your data, like making HTTP requests, and it should return a promise that resolves with the data that you want to cache and use in your application. Now in our app component, which is where we are rendering our test data, we're going to use useQuery to fetch data from the database. For the query key, let's say that's going to be books. And then for the query function, we declare an async anonymous function for the moment, and we call the books endpoint. So now if we run this, we are going to find this course error, which happens because our application is trying to make a request to a different origin because the API is being served on a different port than the UI. To fix this, we can go to the API and use the course helper from Hono. And for our needs, we can just give an empty configuration. Now we refresh the UI and that's fixed. We can see all the data coming in now. To get the actual data from useQuery, we destructure the result. And alongside the data, we can also have access to flags like is loading, is fetching, is success, and a bunch of other things. But for now, let's just destructure the data. And as you can see here, the data returned doesn't have any types. So a way to fix this is by using a generic on useQuery and tell useQuery that we expect an array of books. In the video number 5, we're going to cover a better way to handle this, but for now, this is okay. Now we can rename the data to something that makes a little bit more sense for us. So let's call it books. And we're ready to iterate over our books data. And now the data is showing up correctly in the UI. But there's a little error here. We see an undefined when we're trying to map. And TypeScript is telling us here that books might be undefined. And that actually makes sense because at first render, the books is undefined. There is no data yet made available for the UI. So one way to fix this is with initial data. And we can set initial data as an empty array. And now that should be solved. And now that we have book IDs, we can set a key inside our map so we can finally fix this warning that's been bothering us for a while now. Let's move this handler to its own file so we can also add more handlers for other API calls. I'm going to add a new folder called data and then a books file. Now I'm just going to paste the same logic that we had in useQuery. And I'm going to create a constant for the base URL so we don't repeat that all the time. Now we get rid of this async function and we import our fetch books function. And if we refresh, everything should be just fine. Yep. In our books file inside the data folder, we are going to add more functions for other API calls. Our submit book is going to take a book as an argument and it's going to have a post method, and the body is going to be a stringified JSON of the title, author, and year. Now the update book is also going to take the book, but we want to destructure the ID from the book because we want to pass it on as part of the URL when we call the KPI. And this time we want to make sure that the ID is present, so we can use the required utility type in TypeScript. And the method is going to be put. And now we can add at the end of the URL the ID. And now let's go ahead and add the last one for delete. Okay, this is pretty simple. It only requires the ID. There is no body that we need to send. We just need to make sure that the method is delete, and that's it. And I realized that we haven't added this in the API, so let's do it here. We do apt delete, and it's going to be on /book, and then we take the book ID. I'm gonna copy this for the handler. And now what I want to do is read the book ID from the request. Now with the ID, we can delete matching the book table ID. Great, let's implement the post endpoint in the form. And to do that, we need to implement a mutation. Unlike queries, mutations are typically used to create, update, or delete data, or anything really that has some kind of server side effect. Mutation function in useMutation is the function that you provide that performs the actual mutation, and that can be create, update, or delete on the server. Where React Query starts to shine is because in useMutation, for example, we have access to an onSuccess callback, and here we can do query invalidation. The invalidate queries method in React Query is used to mark cached queries as stale, prompting them to refetch fresh data from the server the next time they are rendered or accessed. So basically, in a mutation, when we have successfully completed the mutation, we can tell React Query, go ahead and refetch the key. And that can save you so much time if you're used to do this thing manually. So in the book form, I'm going to create a create book mutation, which is going to use the submit book as the mutation function. And then on success, I want to invalidate the book's query key. We already have an onSubmit function that receives the value from the form. So within the onSubmit, we're going to do create book mutation.mutate, and then we're going to pass the arguments that our submit book function requires. After we create the book, we want to close the model, but our book form doesn't have access to that. So what we're going to do is pass the open change down to the book form. I'm going to copy the open change props also down to the book form. Like that. And then when our mutation has succeeded, we want to set on open change to false, and that's going to close the model from inside the book form. Great, now let's go ahead and try to add a new book. Let's say The Alchemist. And when we submit, we see that there is an error here, expected number received string. And this happens because our Zod validator is expecting a number, but the HTML input is returning a string. So we can do coerce from Zod, and that should take care of the conversion between the string into a number. All right, let's try it again and see what happens. So looks like everything went okay. We see the data added to the table, and in the activity network, we can see the post call, and then right after a get call, which is triggered by the query client when we invalidate queries. Pretty nice. Now that we have our create mutation in place, we are going to continue with the update. And it is very similar to our create mutation, but we're going to use a different KPI call. Update book mutation, and from here we are going to call our update API, and this stays the same. We want to update our query key and close the model. Since we are using the same model component for creating and updating, we can do something like if we do have an ID, we are going to do the edit or update, I should say. Otherwise, we are going to create. Here now we can do update book mutation and pass the fields that function is requesting. Now when we hit submit here with our changes, we are going to hit the book/id URL as a put request with these 3 fields in the body. So let's go ahead, give it a try. Going to refresh and let's update this one here to 950. Value now is updated to 950. If we take a look at the API calls, first we did a put request, and followed by that we do a get request to update the list of books. So that's looking good. And finally, we need to implement the delete endpoint. We need to work in the delete book dialog, run our delete API call when we click the confirm button. First of all, let's create the mutation. And now in the unconfirm, on click, let's do it separate. And here we know for sure that we have an ID. Let's give it a try. I'm gonna go ahead and delete man alone with himself. Click confirm. And there it is. But as you can see, I forgot to invalidate the queries because the delete was successful, but the row still here. I refresh, it's gone. So let's fix that here on success. We invalidate queries for the books query key. Let's remove the alchemist. So when I click confirm, the row should be gone. There it is. At this point, we have implemented a full CRUD operation for the books entity. We are creating, editing, deleting, and updating. Before I forget, let's commit all our changes. And for the next video, which is video number 5, we will cover Hono RPC to improve our validations because right now they are not the best. We have a lot to improve to make our UI and API type safe. So I'll see you in the next one.